welcome to my presentation. My name is Olga. I am currently pursuing my master's degree in historical linguistics at Humboldt University of Berlin. I studied many grammars of various ancient languages during my studies, including Hittite, hieroglyphic Luwian, Sanskrit, Old Persian, Old Lithuanian, Old Church Slavonic, and Latin. Today, I will take you on a journey to the ancient Near East, 5,000 years ago, and I will tell you about the different civilizations that were formed there, and the languages that were spoken there, and the different status those languages had. The inhabitants of the ancient Near East were most definitely the first polyglots of the world that we have traces of, and that's why the title of my presentation is Polyglots of Ancient Near East. The ancient Near East was an area marked here in green. It was a historical region which was homeland of very first civilizations, and usually historians divide it into several smaller areas. So we have here approximately the area of Mesopotamia corresponding to the present-day Iraq and northeastern part of Syria, as well as a small southern part of Turkey. The rest of the Turkey was called Anatolia, or it is also sometimes referred to as Asia Minor. This area here with the small states at the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea is usually called Levant. And at the periphery of the ancient Near East, ancient Egypt was located. And it will be, I will not talk a lot about ancient Egyptian language, but it will be coming up from time to time during the presentation, since it played a very important role in warfare and trade in the ancient Near East. So the very first civilization that we know of were the Sumerians. They entered Mesopotamia around 4th millennium before Christ, and by the 3rd millennium before Christ, they already formed the first cities. And it is not surprising at all that they decided to settle in Mesopotamia. So as the word itself suggests, it is a land between rivers. It is derived from ancient Greek words mesos, which means middle, and potamos, which means river. And it was a cradle. It is considered to be one of the cradles of civilization. And it was the home of Sumerian civilization, which was one of the 4 river valley civilizations, the other 3 being the ancient Egypt and the Nile Delta, the Indus Valley civilization in the north of India, and the Yellow River civilization in China. Mesopotamia is part of the Fertile Crescent that you can see here in green. And you have the Euphrates here and Tigris, the 2 major rivers between which Mesopotamia is situated. And here was the Sumerian civilization located at the Persian Gulf in the southern part of Mesopotamia. Also to this Fertile Crescent belongs the Levant, the east coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and the Nile Delta, where ancient Egypt was founded. So as green as it looks, you might get the impression that this land was fertile without people having to do anything at all, but this was actually not true. The rainfalls were not that frequent. 2/3 of the year it hasn't rained at all, and then there were heavy rainfalls about 1/3 of the year. So in order to have constant access to water, Sumerians invented irrigation and flood control systems by building canals and dams along the rivers. They also invented farming tools such as plows, and this allowed Sumerians to produce excess crops each year, and that in turn resulted in great population growth, and that not all parts of Sumerian society were engaged in agriculture. So it is evident that Sumerians produced beer and wine, but the other population parts were involved in construction of buildings, the so-called ziggurats, as you can see here. This is one reconstructed, so it may have looked like this. And in addition to that, many Sumerians were involved into organization of society, so political organization and economical organization. Sumerians also were the inventors of a credit and loan system, and their temples functioned as first banks in the history of humanity. So those Sumerian settlements, they were first small, but with increasing population, they grew into states, and those city-states, they were self-governed. You can see those separate areas marked in gray along the two rivers going all the way up to the north. Some of them are extremely important. For example, Ur was the first literate city that we know of. And Uruk was quite a large city. Its urban area counted the population of about 90,000 people already in 3100 before Christ. Another important city is Mari. There are huge archives with numerous clay tablets were discovered, and because of those excavations and all those documents, we could learn a lot about the history of the ancient Near East. But most certainly the very most important invention of the Sumerians was writing. Their first writing was pictographic, which means that each object that they wanted to depict resembled the way that resembled each symbol depicting an object resembled the appearance of this object. So this symbol here is barley, and gradually those symbols, they were turned 90 degrees, and they became more abstract. So Sumerians, in order to increase the speed of writing, they used a stylus, which was triangularly shaped at the end, and they pressed in this stylus to write on clay tablets. So they pressed in the stylus on the wet clay tablets, and this not only improved the writing speed, but this also improved the literacy compared to the previous ages. The fact that this abstract uniform writing did not any longer represent pictures, but it represented syllables. The cuneiform writing spread all over the territory of the ancient Near East. It was used for writing not only Sumerian language, but also very many other languages, such as Akkadian, Eblaid, Elamite, Hittite, Hurrian, Luwian, Urartian, Old Persian, and Palaic. So it was definitely the most widely used script back in the day. The Sumerian language is a language isolate. It died out approximately in the 1st century AD, and it was used as a spoken and written language during the 4th and the 3rd millennia BC. But already during the 3rd millennium BC, it started being replaced gradually by Akkadian language. Nevertheless, it retained its status as a sacred and ceremonial language for a long while, and eventually it was forgotten to be deciphered in the 19th century AD by Assyriologists. The next period in the history of the ancient Near East is marked by the rise of Akkadian Empire. It was formed approximately in 2250, but the Akkadian people, they already settled down in Mesopotamia a little bit earlier, which is apparent from Akkadian names found in Sumerian texts as early as the first part of the 3rd millennium. The special politics of Akkadian kings was that they tried to expand as far as possible. You can see this is the proximate territory of the Akkadian kingdom under Sargon the Great, and it extends all the way to the north of Mesopotamia, and marked here by the yellow arrows are the contacts that Akkadians had to Elam and to the Levant here, and in the north to Anatolia. So they, by establishing Akkadian language as the official language of the Akkadian Empire, Akkadian language could spread very far, and it soon gained the status of the very first lingua franca of the ancient Near East. Nowadays, it is an extinct language, but it belongs to the East Semitic branch of the Afroasiatic family, and several Semitic languages are spoken till today, Arabic being the most widespread. It was written with cuneiform script, which was invented by Sumerians, and most certainly its status as lingua franca contributed to the fact that cuneiform script was spread all over the ancient Near East. Akkadian language was gradually replaced by Aramaic around 900 BC, and here on this chronology of Semitic languages, you can see the Akkadian language with two different dialects, Babylonian spoken in the south of Mesopotamia and Assyrian spoken in the north of Mesopotamia. And here is the Aramaic becoming important around 900 before Christ. One of the interesting facts about Akkadian and Sumerian languages is that it seems that they have coexisted symbiotically for a while, which means that bilingualism must have been widespread, and not only the scribes, but most likely also the whole of the population could speak to some extent both of those languages. It is obvious from the very first Akkadian texts, which are attested approximately in 2300 before Christ, that Sumerian has had a very big impact on Akkadian in every single linguistic area. In morphology, in phonology, syntax, Akkadian has seen changes, which can be only attributed to Sumerian influence. For instance, the typical guttural sounds of the Akkadian language were lost, and the word order in the sentence was also different from the typical Semitic order. There are also very many lexemes that entered Akkadian language from Sumerian, and when examining the relationship between those two languages, it is much easier to make statements about Sumerian influence on Akkadian than the other way around, because Akkadian language was the language of international diplomacy, and Sumerian being in decline all the time and gradually replaced by Akkadian, stayed the language of religion and cultural prestige, and was kind of codified. So you can imagine it a little bit like the status of Latin in medieval Europe and onwards. It becomes clear that Sumerian had to be learned from vocabulary lists and by scribes in scribal schools from such excavated tablets like this one. So the different columns you see here are the different words parallel written in Sumerian and Akkadian, and this is a bilingual list, bilingual vocabulary, but also multilingual vocabularies with other languages in addition to those two have been found. As mentioned before, Akkadian Empire waged wars with very many different states, and probably the biggest threat was posed by the Hittite Empire. The Hittite Empire was founded in the capital city of Hattusha by the Hittite kings, and those were Indo-Europeans. It is not quite clear how they appeared in Anatolia, but they reigned almost the whole territory of Anatolia during the 15th and the 13th centuries BC. They tried to conquer the whole of the ancient Near East, and because of that, they were in conflict with the new kingdom of Egypt, the Middle Assyrian Empire, and other neighboring countries. So on this map, you can see here the Hittite Empire, approximately in 1320 before Christ, at its maximum extent, and the capital city was situated here. From there, they expanded all over Anatolia. This was the area of armed conflict between Egypt and the Hittites. And this armed conflict resulted in a peace treaty. This peace treaty is the first peace treaty in the world that we know of, and it is also the only peace treaty, both versions of which survived. So we have here on the left hand side the Hittite version of this peace treaty written on a clay tablet in Sumerian cuneiform writing, and on the right hand side is the Egyptian version of the peace treaty carved in a stone wall which belonged to a temple. Both versions of these treaties don't differ almost at all from each other, except from minor differences when each side declares who came out as a winner of the Hittite-Egyptian war. The Hittite language, it also is extinct. It belongs to the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European family, along with some other Anatolian languages, which are all extinct. So there's not a single surviving Anatolian language. It was written in cuneiform script, and it was primarily used at the imperial court at the capital city. So if you look at the distribution of Anatolian languages in the Hittite Empire, it is evident here that Luwian and not the Hittite was the most widespread language. The territory, the striped territory around Hattusha is much smaller than the vast territory where Luwian was spoken. And the exact status of Hittite-Luwian bilingualism is not been clarified, but it is subject of current debates among historical linguists. There is one bilingual inscription that I would like to share with you. It is a Hittite-Luwian bilingual inscription, and it is a seal, the so-called Tarkondemos seal, which belonged to a king, and it was used as a stamp being pressed in a clay tablet. And this image that you can see here was then part of the clay tablet, which meant which signified that the king approves of whatever was written on the clay tablet. On the outer ring, there is cuneiform writing. It's king's name written in Hittite, and in the inner part of the circle, there is the king, and to the left and to the right-hand side of the king, there is a Luwian inscription, and Luwian was written with Luwian hieroglyphic script, which differs from the Egyptian hieroglyphic script. It was something invented by the Luwians to write their own language. And there is actually a mistake here made by the manufacturer, because you see the inscription on the left-hand side and this inscription on the right-hand side. They're both the same, and each symbol is flipped around. So here you see this one corresponding to this one, and so on. This one to this one. But this symbol here, it is a donkey head. It is not flipped properly. It is just copied. The next period in the linguistic history of the ancient Near East is marked by the establishment of the Neo-Assyrian Empire around 900 BCE. The Assyrian Empire, the Old and the Middle Assyrian Empire, had the Assyrian language, so the northern dialect of Akkadian language, as their official language. But during the time of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, Aramaic language became the new lingua franca of the ancient Near East. Aramaic language belongs to the Northwest Semitic branch of the Afro-Asiatic family, and it is well known around the world for being the language that Jesus spoke. One of the reasons why Aramaic became lingua franca in the ancient Near East was certainly due to the Aramaic alphabet. So you can see here the symbols differ. It's no longer the cuneiform writing used by Akkadians and Sumerians and so on. It is an alphabet which consisted exclusively of consonants without vowels, and it was developed on the basis of Phoenician writing. Aramaic language was mostly written on parchment and papyrus, and this is the reason why many records did not survive till present day, since parchment and papyrus were not as stable as as clay tablets, and the Assyrians were not as lucky as the Egyptians with their climate, so papyrus didn't survive that well in the climate of the Levant and of Mesopotamia. Aramaic language was the language of administration, of religious proceedings, and also of religious studies. And since it was lingua franca of the ancient Near East, it also became one of the two official languages in the Achaemenid Empire, also called the First Persian Empire, which lasted between approximately 550 to 330 before Christ. Here you can see how large the Achaemenid Empire was at its greatest extent. So it was by far the largest empire until then, spanning over 5.5 million kilometers from Greece in the west and going all the way to Indus Valley, northern India in the east. And the Persian kings who conquered all those territories, they announced two official languages for their empire. So firstly, the Aramaic language, and secondly, the Old Persian language. Old Persian language, like Hittite, belongs to the Indo-European family of languages, but it is not an Anatolian language. It is an Indo-Iranian language, so it is closely related to Sanskrit and Avestan language. This language is not dead. It evolved into Farsi, which is spoken in present-day Afghanistan, Iran, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. And for many years, linguists thought that Old Persian language was exclusively used at the royal court and that it was language of monumental royal inscriptions. But recent research from 2007 shows that Old Persian language was most likely also used for everyday purposes. So like we have here a clay tablet, which is not which was found in the capital city, but it is not a monumental inscription. What you see here, the writing, is the so-called Old Persian cuneiform, which is based on the Akkadian Sumerian cuneiform, but it is not the same. It was invented by the Old Persian king, Darius the Great, for this inscription. This is a really impressive inscription. It is written in 3 different languages, in Old Persian, in Elamite, and in Babylonian, so the southern dialect of Akkadian language. And it depicts real size-shaped Darius, king of kings, and it describes Darius' biography and his conquests all around the ancient Near East and also outside the territory of the ancient Near East. And the inscription is actually much larger. You can see it here. So all this is the inscription. And it's quite impressive because it is located at the height of over 100 meters, carved in a huge rock at the crossroad street between India, Babylonia, and Greece. So after the Persian rule, which was seized by the conquest of Alexander the Great, who must have traveled past this inscription and very many other leaders who went past there must have looked at this great inscription of the Persian king. In conclusion, I would like to say that the ancient Near East, vast territory spanning Mesopotamia, Anatolia, Egypt, and the Levant, was home to very many early civilizations. The inhabitants of this area had different descent and different native tongues, but they have developed a mutual understanding by learning each other's languages and becoming the first polyglots that we know of. Many written sources which were found there, especially written in languages such as Sumerian, Akkadian, and Hittite, were excavated by archeologists and studied by linguists. And thanks to them, we can gain insight into multilingualism in the ancient Near East. I thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any further question about my presentation, if you're interested in full bibliography, or if you would like to learn more about ancient languages, feel free to contact me. I wish you fun in the rest of the conference. Goodbye.